Hey, welcome to Faith and Flavor. We're on our last week of February podcast and talking about love and all the things. And one of the toughest things I think for people, but not people in love, maybe, is maybe saying I'm sorry, right? So when I sit down and I look at things that love is patient, love is kind, I think one of the things that probably should be in that saying is love is learning how to say I'm sorry or being willing to say I'm sorry. Have I said I'm sorry in our married life? I have to think about that one. I'm just kidding. I know I've said I'm sorry, and I know you've said you're sorry. And then that brings me to thinking about the love of the Father and repentance and a repentive heart and all the things, right? And so repentance isn't about shame. It's not about punishment. It's not about proving you're sorry enough. It's the natural response of the heart when it finally realizes how kind God has been all along. And so that's kind of some of the stuff that I want to maybe address. It'll probably be a short broadcast. But before we do that, I'm just going to get into this really quick and so that way it can be setting up. But I'm making this blueberry concoction. And so they have blueberry checks. Did you know that? I did not know that. And they are so good. I could just eat them right out of the box. Not going to, but I could. But I also the recipe calls for that. It's supposed to be a lemon blueberry, but I'm trying to do things that we have at home for this podcast. So all I really had to buy was the blueberry checks, which we have all kinds of checks at home. So and I had some of the white. In this case, it's like the little white wafers, vanilla type chocolate, vanilla flavored wafers. And so I keep chocolate, dark chocolate, milk chocolate, and white chocolate in the house. I keep that because I do a lot of desserts and stuff sometimes. But and I always have powdered sugar. So I usually always have pretzels. And so the recipe doesn't actually call for pretzels. I just put pretzels in there because I feel like without the lemon, it's going to be very sweet. Probably too sweet. But it calls for the whole box. I'm not making the whole batch, so I just use half a box. It calls for 1 1/4 cups of white chips, or in this case, I used the wafers. And then it calls for 2 cups of powdered sugar. In this case, I'm using one because I'm cutting the recipe in half. But I also had pretzel sticks, and so I wanted to have like the sweet and salty and break up the sweet a little bit. So if you can see it, I just kind of like mixed it all together. Yes, we do wash our hands before podcast because I know I'm going to have my hands in it. And so I just kind of broke that up. You could put nuts. You could put, I think cashews would taste really good in there. Um, Whatever. You could probably put little chocolate chips, which I have, but I'm trying to cut the sweet, so I'm not going to use that. So all I'm going to do, and um, Rachel, my daughter, told me that her mother-in-law makes something like this, and she doesn't tell her. She's like, "Well, how much do I put in?" And she's like, "Measure with your heart." Sometimes my heart's not as big as the measurement needs to be. Maybe I don't know. It is Valentine's Day, so maybe I have a little more heart this month. But I'm just going to throw that in. Now, when I heat this up on the wafers, I put it in. I put coconut oil. It really does change the flavor and gives it a really good flavor. But I put like a tablespoon of, well, in this case I put little less than a tablespoon. And then it just says to just mix it up. So that's all I'm going to do, mix it up. And then when I'm heating the white chocolate, I do it on 30-second increments. The first time I put it about 40 seconds, but I watch it closely because that stuff will burn if you're not careful and you don't want to burn it. So, but you want to make sure that this is all coated, a good coating. And then like I know it seems like, well, how is that all going to get all mixed in? But it will, I promise. I've made similar to this before and it turns out great actually. And it really is good with nuts. If I had have had cashews, I would have put them in here, but I didn't have it. So I'm going to get all this yumminess that I can get. And then I'm going to put that powdered sugar in there. And we're going to shake it up and pray it works. And it's starting to get hard already. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that powdered sugar in there. It looks like a lot of powdered sugar. And it probably is. But I used what it called for. I didn't measure with my heart. Measured with my cup. And then it says put it in, obviously, with a lid. Make sure it's on good and tight. And then you just start shaking. And of course, if you're making a bigger batch, bigger bowls are probably, and I got this here where you can kind of see through the lid, but it's getting peppery. Honestly, I'm very excited for this. I really wanted to taste the blueberry because I know it has to be good. And I think...
Definitely a sound engineer's nightmare for your podcast.
Sorry, Ron. But there we go. Let's see the verdict. Ooh, it looks like snow. I'm going to shake it down a little bit. Want to try it?
Sure.
Pretty good, huh?
Yep.
I think it would have been great with nuts, though. We're probably nuts enough, though.
Right.
But, so anyhow, let's talk about the sin, the love, and the repentance. When I used on the last podcast the example of when we got married, right? There were certain things we didn't do because we loved each other. It's not to say that we never crossed the line in some verbiage that we use, because we have, right? It's not that, man, those were really good. Sorry, squirrel. That's what he loves about me, folks, by the way. But it's not that we haven't done a transgression against each other, right? In some form. Now, we've never went out on each other and stuff like that. But even our language, sometimes, if we're real and raw and honest, hasn't been perfect towards each other. But at the end of the day, we might have been hurt, but we still had communication. We're a lot unlike God in the fact that people don't always get over the hurt. I look back, like we've talked about with Adam and how he sinned and all of this stuff and the consequences, all that, and that God still came and called Adam and walked with him in the cool of the evening. And when we think about love and the unconditional part of it, I love you enough that when I do something that I know makes you mad, or you do something that makes me mad, we have a love language. And a lot of times, even our love language sounds harsh sometimes when we're not even being harsh. I know when we're sitting on our job and we don't mix words because we're just really busy, and whatever the reason is, we know our language, right? God knows our language. He knows when we get, some people are like, God, I'm just so angry at you. That doesn't mean that you're not in love with God. It means that you're so human that he loves you even in your sin and trespasses, even in your humanness. He still loves you enough that he sent his son. You can't get greater love than that, right? Number one, that Jesus would lay his life down. You know, he was in the Garden of Gethsemane and he was not real excited about what he was about to face. And he even prayed to, as though it were great drops of blood, it says in the garden. And then he's got the disciples that are hanging out waiting for him and falling asleep. And then he comes up and said, couldn't you just stay up with me for an hour? And then he prays in the garden and he says, you know, God, not my will, but thine be done. He loved the Father and the calling of him so much that he was willing to lay his life down not just for the Father, not just for the calling, but for mankind and for humanity. And if we know that the model of Jesus is like that towards us, the same as I know that you love me, why would I not at least want to keep our love communication open, even if it means I have to say I'm sorry sometimes, you know? Thoughts?
Well, I often when I'm doing marriage counseling and so forth, I usually use the somewhat breaking the ice, the marriage counseling situation where the wife says, "He never tells me he loves me," and the man saying, "Well, I told you I loved you when we got married, and if I ever change my mind, I'll let you know." I often use that example because it's such an extreme example of communication and love language. It's it's something that has to be cultivated. You have to learn. It's not uh, unlike common language or English language. Love language is not always spoken. Sometimes it's a reaction or an action to something that's going on or some kind of situation. Sometimes it's a silence as opposed to a conversation. So something has to come to break the ice. You know, and usually when a woman's upset, she'll tend to be more quiet off somewhere. Well, then the man, if he ignores that, it's going to intensify the situation because our love language has to be in some kind of response to what you spoke, even though you didn't actually say anything. And so those are the kind of things that have to be learned in relationships. And of course, you know, in our God relationship, sometimes He'll speak to us in our hearts and in our lives, and in our situations, and sometimes there's a silence. Uh, One of the main reasons for silence is because we haven't responded to the last thing He said. So therefore, He's not going to give you the next step until you fulfill this step. So we have to learn that love language, and it's different for everyone because how He speaks to us is dependent on the way that we are, the condition that we're in, and the heart of us, so that we have to learn how He speaks to us, so that we can open up those lines of communications to cultivate the relationship, grow.
In 1 John 4:10, it says, "Herein is love, not that we loved God, but that He loved us." God didn't use His love as a bargaining. He didn't use it as a bargaining chip with Adam. He didn't use it as a bargaining chip with, um, well, even if we look at, like, let's say David, or any of the, you can pick anybody in the Bible, ones that were great people and ones that were not. I Even though the consequences, like we've spoke about, are there, He still loved them. It was not what He used as a bargaining chip. It was always present, always. And a lot of people, and I don't think that we've ever, I can't even remember a time when you and I have ever said, "If you love me, you will." You know, I just don't like that language. And I don't, first of all, if I didn't love you, right, I wouldn't still be here. Because the truth is, you or us in our individual selves aren't always rosy. And we're not always the most loving people in the world. And if you are one of those loving people that's always love, I just need to hang out with you, I guess. But we're not always lovable, but we always love each other at the end of the day. And sometimes they say, "Don't go to bed mad." I
Lost
don't
a
know.
lot of sleep at that first 3 years there.
Well, we practiced that the first few years, but now sometimes I think silence is probably golden, right?
But
But
it's kind of like saying, "I'm sorry." The words can be spoken, but if you don't feel it in your heart, it doesn't change anything. And if the carrot held out there is, well, I get to go to bed if I just tell her I'm sorry and we go to bed. Well, it didn't change the fact that in your heart you were still mad and you were still upset, but you went to bed saying you're sorry, but you didn't really mean you're sorry. Or you want to remind her the next time something comes up, or him, of what happened. Well, the last time this happened, you did this, or you didn't really, the sorry wasn't really there. It was just a word you spoke to move on to the next situation. gets
It's like it's like I'm going to give you an apology with fine print. Grace doesn't have fine print, right? And so a lot of times we want to throw in fine print in our apology or fine print in our acceptance of a situation when really grace doesn't have a fine print. And if we're modeling our love after Christ, we can't deliver the apology or hang with that person with a fine print clause, you know?
yeah, because the fine print clauses come in contracts. Contracts are designed for if you do this, then I'll do this. Marriage contracts are not designed that way. They're covenantal, and so it's a marriage covenant. It's not a marriage contract. It's based on no matter what you do, I love you. No matter what you do, you love me, and that's unchanging. Where contracts do have that fine print, as you mentioned it. If you do what I want, if you do what I say, if you fulfill all the ordinances in the contract, then you get rewarded. Covenant, marriage covenants and relationship covenants are not based on that. It has to be, even if the person can't love you back, you still love them. That's the way God designed it.
And love is not controlling, right? And so when you and I got married, I mean, it's probably not a secret, right? I would have been a hard one to control. You would have been a hard one to control, right? And people get married thinking, oh, I'm going to change this person. I'm going to control. That's not love, first of all. God doesn't love us to control us. He loves us to free us, right? And so one of the best things to me in our relationship is, and just being very, I'm not tooting your horn. I'm just saying, you, you really love me. You really support me. And even when I have a hard time trying to find it in myself, you see the good in me. And I think that's what God does for us. I think a lot of times when we have a lot of shortness in ourself, in our thoughts of ourself, He knows the thoughts that He has towards us. Even if our thoughts towards us are not the best towards us, and we, probably love ourselves as much as we can. And I know a lot of times it's hard to find self love, but God supports us. God knows, like He says in Jeremiah 29:11, I know the plans I have for you. I know the thoughts I have of good. And so that's a relationship. Even when I can't see that I can achieve something, you believe in me. So I think that if we have the same emotion towards God, we believe in Him. We want to be the best bride of Christ, if you will, or the best child of God. And it's not to gain the favor of God, it's because we have the favor of God.
I think ultimately that you have to get to a point where whatever the relationship is, there is no upgrade. There is no one else that I could get that's better. That's the ultimate attitude I think you have to have, determine, develop, is that, well, if she doesn't fulfill, my every need, then I upgrade. Go find somebody else. That's not an option. And I believe that if you sell out to that concept of, I've got the best. There is no one else out there.
You think I'm the best?
And that's, I think, is ultimately how you get past all of the shortcomings and all the faults and failures. I believe God feels that way about us. We are the best. And I believe that in a relationship, we have to get to that point where we're completely sold out and there's no opportunity or option for change or upgrade or that's not to say that everything about you is perfect, but there's no one else that you could find that would be better. There's no one else that you could find that would support more. There's no one else you could find that would love you more. There's no one that would be more, and I think that's the ultimate attitude you have to develop, that, you've got the best and there's no one else out there. So I believe is what God feels about us. He knows He created the best. He knows what's in our hearts. He knows who we are. And I think He feels that way about us.
I agree. But I will say this. when you come home with bacon, I mean, that's like my love language right there, right? Most of you guys want chocolate and all that. Maybe you got chocolate and roses for Valentine's Day. My love language is bacon. And one time we went to a restaurant, and actually, believe it or not, the restaurant didn't even have bacon, but it was my birthday, and he asked them could they make bacon roses, and literally the restaurant, it was a small little family style restaurant. They literally went out, bought a thing of bacon, and came and baked me bacon roses and brought it to the table. That's the kind of love language that just goes a little further, right? That's the icing on the cake. I hope you have a great day on purpose. I know we're running out of time, but I hope you enjoyed the podcast today.